So the characteristics of this new species of trouble, um, they're truly distressing because of how they rip to shreds the trust that exists between us. So we find a crumbling of trust, the shredding of community ties, a chronic social trauma that victims only slowly recover from, if at all. Um, there's a lot of post-traumatic stress involved in a recovery from a natural disaster, a pervasive sense of dread about what the future brings. Once you experience a natural disaster and then you experience a failed response, it leaves this sense of dread in you, whether this could happen to you again. And the damage is psychological as well as to the physical body. This leads us to a discussion about natural versus technological disasters. Natural disasters suggest a lack of control over processes beyond the reach of humans. Um, Maybe an asteroid strike. We can't control how an asteroid is flying through space and whether it's going to hit the Earth. That's a natural disaster. Technological disasters suggest perceived loss of control over processes thought to be within the reach of humans and our commitment to care for one another. It has an element of dread, which is particularly characteristic of these technological disasters. And these technological disasters certainly carry with us into the future. Normal accidents, normal technological accidents, we understand them as preventable. To understand the potential for disaster can be viewed as looking at the disaster in relationship to two dimensions. The first is whether the first dimension is the extent to which the system interactions are linear or complex, and then the second variable is the extent to which a system is loosely coupled or tightly coupled. This creates the impetus for Perot's theory, where in systems that have complex and tightly coupled interactions, we should expect the occasional occurrence of a serious accident. Complex interactions confuse and confound those who deal with a breakdown in the system. Tight coupling gives those individuals very little margin for error. So when you have complex interactions and very little room for error, you can almost predict a catastrophe. A technological disaster, of course, is really a social disaster. It's a social disaster both in the organization of a dangerous situation and in the effects on us and sense of confidence in each other that comes out of it when the disaster happens. We live in a risk society. This is a society where conflict shifts to non-class based struggles over pollution and other environmental bads. So we're moving from a society that exists on class. So you're struggling over who gets the environmental goods. But as we move into a risk society, what we're really getting into is who's actually getting the environmental bads. This reflects a restructuring of social organization, and it illustrates how we're moving from a risky life to a life of risk. This should get us to question the risk society. There's a criticism focused on a perverse equality of risk compared to class inequalities in industrial society. So this idea that we've somehow shifted from wealth, who gets the environmental goods, to who gets the environmental bads, really overshadows the continued existence of class inequality. the environmental bads are still doled out in unequal ways. A risk society is little help for understanding environmentalism of poor countries, and it overstates the degree to which we have overcome this economic anxiety and an economic conflict. Uh, Risk and democracy, these two concepts can go together, um, but at the moment they don't tend to. What we really need is a dialogic rationality, or a rationality that we can argue with, that respects the reasoning of others and that takes those reasons into consideration when it answers those reasons with its own. Um, uh, we have to accept that science is uncertainty and there is no final truth. Science should not be searching for a final truth. It should just be searching to better understand the world that it exists in. Um, so this forces us to talk about the debate, or this willingness to continually refine and change one's views in light of the evidence and new experiences. This is what science should be about. This is what science was founded on in the beginning. And I think that we went down a rationality rabbit hole that we're just now climbing out of. This creates a real democratic potential for rationality. Um, you can see citizens and scientists working together in participatory research to protect their own local environments. You can see risk assessment as a democratic means, um, but but we should not assume that it's of a universal perspective, and we need willingness to engage in the universe of perspectives, the plural, not the singular. And in the end, we have to really understand the dialogue of risk. Powerful social interests frequently and deliberately stand in the way of dialogue of risk between citizens and scientists. The example in the one of the examples in the book was Oprah's mentioning of mad cow disease and how she would not be eating hamburger anymore. And in response to that statement, the meat markets lost 10% of its future worth. And the Texas meat industry sued Oprah multiple times for disparaging their product without much proof. But in the case of Oprah, she had a lot of money. She spent in excess of $1 million defending herself and came out vindicated. But the Texas Meat Association or the Texas Meat Packers made their point as well. If you're going to talk disparagingly about their product, you better have a lot of money to defend yourself in court.